Well, this looks like a mess now, doesn't it? But, number one, it's an organized mess because I have a pretty good idea where everything is. Number two, I'm the only one that comes in here and we have no small children. Now then, what am I doing? Well, if you looked at my chicken breeding pens, my Bantam breeding pens, I said it time and again that cheap plywood was a horrible decision. So, I am building new ends for those pens now that it's finally starting to melt out there. This was all bare ground yesterday. That means I'll be able to get the pens up out of the ice and snow and replace the ends. Now, before the snow hit, I did get the solid ends put on the pens, so I don't have to worry about that, but I didn't get the barrel end replaced, and that's what I'm building today. So, first off, I've got, you can't really see it at the moment, let me go ahead and move this, but what I've got underneath of here is one of my solid ends that I'm using as a template. Alright, that's what the finished end looks like. And basically, I'm lining up my pieces on top of it so that I can mark them to cut. Anytime you can make a template when you're making multiples of something, it is going to save you a ton of time and headache. Since I am reusing the barrels and the hinges and everything that are on the plywood, I have to make my opening in the same spot as what they had. When I made them, I made this little diagram telling me what my spacing needed to be. Alright, it's 7 inches from the ground up to the bottom of the hole, 15 inches from the ground up to the top of the hole, holes 12 inches wide on center. Because of that, I had to cut a little skinny strip here to get my 7 inches, because these boards are only 5 and something. So I put it down at the bottom. I debated on putting it at the bottom at first, but the more I thought about it, it just seemed like a good idea, because if this board were to rot out or pop off over time, it's a much smaller space, and also I'm not having to replace one huge board. I can take a board and rip down and conserve my materials that way. I don't have a board here yet. Why is that? Well, it's because once I cut this side, I will have a piece out of this board that's the same size, and I can put it in over here. Now you may notice up at the top here, I've got some of them that look like they've already been cut, and that's because they are cutoffs from longer boards at the bottom on previous sections that I've already built. And that's why I've got all these pieces down here on the floors, because as I go up top, I can see which ones fit and reuse them, so that by the time I'm done, out of a 4-foot piece of fence picket, that's all I'm going to have for throwaway, which I will then burn in my wood stove. These little straps here are just fence picket that are ripped down. I believe they were 1 3/8 inches, if I recall. The first two are 2 foot. Second, the one up the middle is probably 2 foot as well. I did not go all the way to the peak with it because I need space for the 2x2 that runs from front to back. Now this will be the inside edge of the board because I need the flat space of the back of this to mount my barrel to. So the next step will be to reach under with a pen or a pencil or a marker and scribe the edge of my pattern that's underneath, and then flip it over and cut it with a saw. there's another little trick for you. If you don't have to sit there and measure every single little angle on every board, don't do it. It's going to save you time. Scribe it. Scribing is basically tracing from one finished piece to an unfinished piece in this situation. Here's what it looks like once it's been scribed. You've got a nice straight line, straight-ish anyways, that you can run your saw along. Now, where I've only got these boards attached by one board up in the center, you'd be correct in assuming that that makes them a little flimsy, but got to remember on the original frames I had 1x uprights coming up on both sides of the ends, which the chicken wire was attached to. So when I put these on, I'm going to be screwing this board to the uprights, and that will make it much more sturdy. This here is one of the end pieces. If you just want to see that real quick. It only has one support going up through the center. So again, there'll be supports coming up from both sides. So once you've cut your scribed lines, this is what you should be left with. The next step is going to be making a little door here that'll hinge up just like on the plywood. So the opening for the door itself is just a little bit over 12 inches across and about 8 3/8 high, if I recall. So what I did is I ripped one board down to 4 inches. So the door itself is 8 inches tall. And I cut them so that they are just under 12 inches. Reason I did that is because this wood will swell and I want it to be able to still open and close. If it's still a tight fit, I can always unhinge it and shave it down later. Now, since they'll be hinging on this side, what I'm actually going to do with this door is I'm going to have it sitting in here like this, because then I will be able to lift this up and it will be able to lay flat or close to flat up against the top section here. Once you've got your first prototype end measured, cut, and assembled, then you can make a cut list based on how many you need to make. I want to make 15 of these, so what I usually do is I order my list from the smallest width all the way up to the biggest width, and I also make comment of if I'm going to cut it out of a 4-foot chunk of board or a 2-foot chunk of board. Keep in mind the availability of the wood you're working with. In my instance, I know that there are times when it's a lot easier for me to get 2-foot chunks of board, and that typically seems to be the case when you're working with scrap wood. Your shorter lengths are easier to get. So if I don't need to cut up a 4-footer, I'm not going to. Once you're done making your cut list, it's time to get busy with the saw. Now, it's important to try and organize this stuff as best you can. So I've got my long pieces that go at the bottom. I've got my 3 strap brace pieces. I've got these 2 little angle pieces that I cut because they have to be narrow anyway, so I went ahead and cut the angle on them while I was at it. I've got the pieces for the door, and then I've got these pieces here which go below those pieces. Doing as much as you can at one station and then moving on to the next will help save you time. So once they're all cut, then you can just start flying like clockwork with this though. And what I've been doing, I've got the original, I put together 4 more last night out of the 15. When you're laying them out, take the bottom corner of your board and lay that up against the angle as you go. So here again you can see because then when you're cutting off, you're minimizing the amount of wasted material. What I've been doing is I've been completely assembling the boards that go to these two first braces and then continuing on with the final 4 boards. That might seem counterproductive to what I said earlier, where you do as much as you can at once, but because of the fact that those top 4 boards are braced down the center, they're a little more flimsy, they can move around on me. So I'd rather just pre-drill and screw these 2 pieces and get that all nice and rigid before I continue on to the top. Once you've got your end pieces assembled, you can put them back on the frame of your pen. This is a Bantam pen, so that's why I have 2 barrel style ends on it. As you can see, I had to go to a larger latch hasp for the to compensate for the thickness of the boards that I used, and I put it in the center. As you recall, I was having issues with the 2 latch system just being kind of obnoxious. So that's the inside. That'll have your braces, and then your door will be mounted so that it'll hinge and pull up with this blue rope.